Every legend begins with a single moment. For Peter Parker, it was a bite. A moment so small, so random, that it could have happened to anyone. But fate chose him. Subscribe now to dive deeper into the hidden meanings behind heroes we all think we know. Because Peter's story is not just about power. It is about how stories are told and retold. In the comics of 1962, Peter Parker was a boy from Queens. A shy, awkward teenager, bullied at school, ignored by most, living with his Uncle Ben and Aunt May, who loved him dearly but could never shield him from the loneliness he carried. And then came the science experiment, the radioactive spider. It bit him in an instant, and in that instant, Peter's life changed forever. The bite gave him more than strength. It gave him agility, speed, and the ability to cling to walls. And soon, the spider sense, that tingle of warning sharper than any instinct. From the start, this origin was simple, almost mythic. A nobody, touched by science, rising into something extraordinary. But decades later, the MCU retold this story differently. When we first meet Tom Holland's Peter Parker in Civil War, there is no spider scene, no science experiment, no long build-up. The bite is not shown at all. It is simply implied, because Marvel assumed by then we all already knew. This silence was deliberate. It told us, the bite doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what Peter does with it. Yet here's the hidden meaning. The comics gave us the bite as destiny. The MCU gave us the bite as background. One framed Peter's power as miracle. The other framed it as accepted truth. But in both versions, the heart remains. A boy is changed. A life is rewritten. And from this one random accident, the Spider-Man myth is born. Still, the bite is more than just a story detail. It's a symbol. In the comics, it represents the fear of science in the atomic age. Radiation was a terror, a mystery, a force both dangerous and full of possibility. Spider-Man was born in that moment of cultural anxiety. In the MCU, the silence around the bite reflects a new era. We don't fear radiation anymore. We fear responsibility. We fear failure. We fear what comes after power, not how we got it. And that is why the MCU never shows it. Because today, the bite is not the story. The choice is. Yet no matter how it's told, this first act of Peter's transformation always carries the same weight. The idea that heroes can be ordinary kids. That greatness can come from the most random, overlooked places. That even a boy from Queens with nothing could be chosen by chance and rise to become a legend. This is the bite that changed everything. But it is only the beginning. Because with Peter Parker, power is never the full story. The real story begins when tragedy strikes. When choice replaces chance. When a boy learns that being Spider-Man is not about what you gain, but about what you lose. The spider bite gave Peter Parker his powers. But it was loss that made him a hero. Because power without responsibility is just chaos. And for Peter, that lesson came too late. Subscribe now if you want to keep uncovering the hidden truths behind the stories we thought we knew. Because Peter Parker's tragedy is the heartbeat of Spider-Man. In the original comics, Peter wanted to use his powers for himself. He wore the mask to wrestle for money, to impress others, to feel like somebody, for the first time in his life. And when he had the chance to stop a thief, he didn't. Not my problem, Peter thought. He let the criminal escape. But then came the night that changed everything. The thief Peter ignored killed Uncle Ben. And Peter realized, with horror, that his selfish choice had taken away the man who loved him most. From that night forward, Spider-Man lived by words etched in comic history. With great power, there must also come great responsibility. It was not just a motto. It was guilt carved into his soul. A truth Peter could never forget, no matter how many times he saved the city. Now, compare this to the MCU version. Tom Holland's Spider-Man never had the iconic Uncle Ben moment on screen. There is no burglar he fails to stop. No dramatic death in a quiet house. Instead, the MCU built Peter's responsibility through another tragedy, the death of Aunt May in No Way Home. She speaks the same words, the same message, But years later, after Peter has already fought alongside Iron Man against Vulture, and even among the Avengers, the MCU delayed the lesson. It made responsibility something Peter grew into, not something he was cursed with from the start. And this difference matters. The comics gave us Spider-Man as a boy crushed by guilt. The MCU gave us Spider-Man as a boy slowly shaped by mentorship, failure, and finally, loss. One path is instant tragedy. The other is gradual growth. Both lead to the same place. A young hero who fights not for glory, but because he must. But think about what this change means. By delaying the Uncle Ben story, the MCU freed Spider-Man from repeating what we already knew. It allowed his tragedy to strike later, harder, and in a way that redefined his journey. Because when Aunt May falls, Peter has already lived as Spider-Man, already carried the weight, and her words make him realize he must now stand alone. The hidden meaning is clear. In the comics, Peter becomes Spider-Man because of his failure. In the MCU, he becomes Spider-Man because of his growth. And yet, both stories circle back to the same truth. Responsibility is not a gift. It is a burden. It demands sacrifice. It demands pain. And it shapes Spider-Man into one of the most human heroes ever written. This is why Spider-Man resonates across generations. Because his story reminds us that greatness doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from learning through mistakes, through heartbreak, through the kind of lessons that scar you, but also push you to rise. But Peter's transformation is not complete yet. Because Spider-Man is not just about how power begins. It's about what that power means to the world. And how two different versions, comic and MCU, reflect the eras that created them. The next chapter will reveal how these two origins, so different in style, ultimately lead to the same enduring legend. Spider-Man's story doesn't stop at tragedy. It evolves. It adapts. Because every version of Peter Parker reflects the world that created him. The 1960s comics gave us a Peter who stood for everyday responsibility. He was a teenager dealing with bills, bullies, and heartbreak, at a time when superheroes were larger-than-life gods. Spider-Man broke that mold. He was human first, hero second. And his failure with Uncle Ben spoke directly to the fears of a generation learning how much one choice could matter. Now fast forward to the MCU. Audiences in the 2010s had already seen Uncle Ben die twice on screen. They had lived through countless reboots. The MCU needed something new. So instead of repeating the past, they reimagined Peter's path. Here, Spider-Man is introduced in the middle of a bigger universe, mentored by Iron Man, shaped by the Avengers, but ultimately, still destined to face his own devastating loss. This is the genius of the contrast. Comic Peter begins with guilt. MCU Peter begins with guidance. One is forged in isolation, the other in community, but both are stripped of safety in the end, left to carry the burden alone. That's why No Way Home feels so powerful. Because for the first time, MCU Peter is truly alone. No Tony, no May, no friends who remember his face, just Spider-Man against the world. And suddenly, he looks a lot more like the Peter we've always known from the comics. So what does this mean? It means Spider-Man's origin is not just one story. It's a myth retold again and again, adjusted for each generation. A reflection of what responsibility looks like in different times. In the comics, responsibility was about personal guilt. In the MCU, responsibility is about growing up in a world already full of heroes. One is intimate. The other is epic. But both lead to the same truth that power demands sacrifice. That Spider-Man cannot escape the weight of his choices. This is why Spider-Man endures. Because whether it's a teenager in 1962 or in the MCU, we see ourselves in him. Flawed, hopeful, struggling to balance life and duty, falling but rising again. Peter Parker is not just one story. He is every story about the cost of becoming who you're meant to be. And no matter how many times his origin is told, one thing never changes. Spider-Man will always remind us that the greatest heroes are not born in perfection. They are made in pain, in growth, and in responsibility.